Okay, hi everybody. Let's get started. Hello everybody, and welcome to day 2 of the English Australia EdTech SIGS Symposium. I'm Christy, and I'm one of the deputy conveners for the group. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before I introduce the rest of the team and today's session, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land where I'm joining you from today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. I've only been in Australia myself since January, and I feel so grateful to live on this country, to experience the beautiful lands surrounding me, and to have been welcomed into such a strong sense of community. Please do share where you're joining us from in the chat. We'd love to get to know you a little better. It's always lovely to see the range of areas represented. So I'd love to introduce you to the rest of the team here. So you can probably see some familiar friendly faces. So we've got Casey, our group's convener, Gabrielle, my fellow deputy convener, and Sophie and Rachel, who we have to thank today for setting up today's event, and so much more of the behind the scenes work that they do to make sure our group, as well as the other special interest groups, runs smoothly. So we've got a packed agenda here for you all today. And if you were here yesterday, you'll know that we'll be continuing with our theme of putting Gen AI into practice and moving beyond the hype. So I'll give you a quick recap on yesterday for those of you who were lucky enough to be here yesterday, and you can hear about it again. And for those of you who weren't able to join us, we'll be sharing the recordings and the materials so you can catch up. So we kicked off yesterday afternoon with a plenary from Chris Bush, an expert in successful AI implementation in Australian education. He gave us all some brilliant tips and tricks on how to keep us teachers as head chefs when using and working with AI. We then had a range of speakers to follow, focusing on a range of topics from academic writing to grammar through listening, and finishing with a brilliant focus on how Gen AI can support neurodiverse students. So as I said, the recording from yesterday will be shared, and this one's today will be shared as well. And we really encourage you to catch up on all of the great sessions we've had so far. So on to today's program. So Aparna will be starting our day focusing on the human element of AI and English teaching before we turn to topics around classroom warm-ups, student self-efficacy, and finally a session on AI privacy. So lots to come. But I'll pass you over to Sophie now to introduce our plenary speaker.
Thanks so much, Christy. Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Sophie. I'm the General Manager at English Australia. And today I have the great pleasure of introducing our plenary speaker, who is also an old colleague and dear friend of mine, Aparna Jacob. Aparna is the Director of Studies for Academic English Pathways at UNSW College. And at the college, she oversees ELICOS and embedded English programs. And since 2017, Aparna's led a number of strategic and innovation initiatives for English language education. And more recently, she led a project to integrate a tool called Mentor AI into pathway programs at UNSW College. Today, Aparna is going to be talking to us about the initial existential crisis of AI and now moving into a period of hopefully more informed practice. And she'll also emphasize the human element in English language teaching. Thanks so much for joining us today, Aparna.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you to the EdSig team. I just have to say, what a lovely introduction, and thank you everybody for coming to this session on a Thursday afternoon. Sophie just mentioned Mentor AI, and I just wanted to pick up on that and do a little bit of context setting as well. Mentor AI, like other innovations that we've seen around the place over the last couple of years, are very, very representative of a particular level of confidence we have reached as a sector and as individuals and educators in ELT. Chris showed us a few tricks and tips yesterday and a few assistive tools that teachers could use in the classroom. And again, I club this all under an umbrella of confidence that we have achieved right now. What I wanted to maybe start with is reflecting a little bit on this amazing journey we've had. It's hard to believe that it's only been 3 years. It feels like a lifetime, doesn't it? And there is a reason for that. So what we might do today is take stock of this journey we've had over the last 3 years in particular with Gen AI. Where are we at now with our confidence levels? What have we learned? And I really think it's particularly significant that we're doing this at the end of 2025, going into 2026. One of the things I'm very fond of doing, and I think actually there is a responsibility on us as educators that we get into the practice of doing this, is anticipating the future. Now, I'm using the word anticipate very deliberately and intentionally here for a couple of reasons. Most of you might know that we are actually at the beginning, not really even the cusp, but quite in the beginning of the fourth industrial revolution. This one is different from the past 3 that we've been through, where the cycles of change came every 25 years, 30 years. What's happening now is the change is so rapid, it's coming about in 5 years, 2 years, 3 years, sometimes 1 year, as you've seen. So with this rapid pace of change, how do we keep track or anticipate the future? The answer is a bit of yes and a bit of no. It is actually getting possible for us to look around us at the evidence that exists in our environment now and anticipate what is to come. This might sound a bit strange, but please stay with me. A lot of the lessons and conversations we're going to have today are actually lessons from cybernetics. It's not as fantastical as it sounds. If any of you have looked into what cybernetics is, you will know that it's a really interesting field where a number of interdisciplinary areas converge. So, for example, environment, biology, technology, organizations, society, and how they influence each other. The reason I want to touch on cybernetics right at the start is because this dialogue that happens between innovation, organisms, synthetic organisms, and organizations is extremely relevant to our conversation today and for the things we're about to experience or actually are already experiencing. Yeah. The last thing I'll do today is tell you 2 stories. The first one is from the cybernetics archives, and it is about a mechanical horse. The second one, and the lessons we can learn from innovations like that. The second one is about AI sex bots. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? But all the feedback I've received so far is that everybody's really keen to hear about the mechanical horse. So let's maybe get on with it. What we might kick off and do is take stock, as I promised, because we're at the end of a really rich period right now. We've had immense learning, immense challenges, and also immense opportunities. A bit of a few rules and things to keep in mind as we do this. We're going to do a pulse check, which is basically a poll, and Sophie's going to help us launch that. You will be given 6 statements. Please choose the ones that resonate with you the most and speak to you the most. Ignore the rest. You can choose up to 3 that speak to you. Please read them carefully, but do not think too much before responding. Your first response is probably the best one. Are we ready? Sophie, can I hand over to you to launch the poll?
Oh, good. I've just launched it.
30 seconds, everybody. How are we going, Sophie?
Going well, getting lots of responses.
Excellent.
Okay,
So as we
close it
finish,
off.
yes, thank you,
Yeah.
Sophie. And I think we should look at the results as
Yeah.
well when you can.
Can you see the results now?
I can. Can the group see them as well?
Yes.
Yep.
Fantastic. There's a particular trend here. I'm very interested in the fact that 57% of our group here. Oh, there's more. Sorry. Sophie, can we scroll down? Yes. Look at that. 57% of our group says, what a time to be alive. They agree that this is probably a great time to be alive as an educator with the possibilities AI has opened for you and how you teach and how you reach your students. Love the fact that 67% are already seeing AI's limits and benefits, and you're taking a level of responsibility in the way you integrate it into your teaching. Brilliant. Can I just say also that other things I'm noticing here is 17% of us are still a bit cautious and haven't really, have taken a first few steps, but not ventured too far into the AI experiments. Still curious, 45%, but a bit nervous as well. And I think that is a sign of respect. You know, this is not a toy, and I think we know that now. Okay, it's great to not be completely confident because, like I said, proceed with caution. So I've got to say on these results, very impressive, but also preaching to the converted, given who you are and why you're here. And again, not surprising given the level of confidence we as a sector have. Now, these confidence statements, if you use with another group or even a cross section of your organization, of course, you're going to get lots of different results. So feel free to use these. These are just to provoke and to get you to reflect on where you are at as an individual, because as I'm about to show you, your journey would look very different to others in your group, the group itself, the organization itself, and then the sector sometimes. So we might just move on then to put these results into context and just move a little bit more. I want to use one of the cycles or models that we're quite familiar with, only because over the last couple of years, a number of experts have used this lens to look at adoption and maturity of a technology that is adopted by an individual, a sector, but mostly by organizations. The hype cycle, Gartner's hype cycle usually has 5 elements to it. The first one is always a technology trigger where a new piece of technology is introduced into an environment. There's not much history, there's a bit of a surprise, but people get on with experimenting with it and there is a little bit of excitement to it. You get to the point of the peak of inflated expectations due to the hype that has been built up by using this technology, possibly success stories that have fueled this hype as well. But as people get more familiar with this innovation or technology, the good and the bad start to surface. And where you were focused on the positives, the focus now shifts to some of the more negative, sobering elements of it, which may be appropriate. But from there on, what I call a growth or a maturity level begins, where integrating it, embedding it into our context with a level of maturity, sophistication is what starts happening. So just in terms of an exercise I did over this past couple of weeks, and you're very welcome to do it, I just wanted to show you what I noticed at UNSW College. Now, again, this is a very individual thing. It's not very scientific. And when in fact Gartner's hype cycle is for a technology, there was a lot of different elements that went into our adoption of AI, both from a social perspective, a cultural perspective, a teaching perspective, you name it. These are just my reflections on what I observed. I do urge you to plot something like this for yourself to see where were you at the end of 2022, beginning of 2023, end of 2023. What happened over the last 3 years for you on this cycle or this curve? I remember that innocent, joyous, experimental phase we all were in with GPT every night, asking lots of questions, trying to get it to answer all kinds of things. Very exciting. Very quickly, the teachers started experimenting with it for student feedback and support. We then realized, oh shit, what about the assessments? Very quickly, and went from there. There is a proliferation of tools, and there was a proliferation of tools back then, and also now. But my point about that peak of inflated expectations versus the slope of enlightenment, huge difference in the level, the sophistication, and responsibility that is coming across in the tools created back then, and hopefully now and moving into the future. I won't dwell too much on this, but here's another one that I overlaid. What was the organization or the provider or the regulator doing at the same time? Couple of thoughts. Is it a passing fad? I've just overlaid it in green to make it distinct from what an individual was experiencing or an educator was experiencing. Was it a fad? Should we ban AI in our classrooms? Policies and guidelines from TEXA or the organization often came almost a year later. And that is just how it rolls, because the fact that these innovations were first experimented with at a grassroots level was entirely appropriate. Obviously, lots of conversations about assessment. What are we teaching? How are we teaching? 2 lanes versus highways. Everybody got to a point of overwhelm, whether it was academic integrity conversations or just the volume of breaches and the fact that so many AI solutions were cropping up around you and you had to constantly keep on top of it. We're now at the stage where we're talking about banning the ban of AI or ban the banning of AI. So we've come almost a very different spiral. It's not a circle, it's almost like a spiral where we're evolving. But this part, the last bit of it, hasn't actually been realized. I want to call out a few peculiar characteristics that are unique to us as a group of educators in ELT. It was the individuals that led the charge. And as I said, there was a 2 or 3 speed economy at play where the individuals, groups, and organizations, as well as the sector and the regulator, moved at very different speeds. The ELT educators in the classroom were crucial to some of the innovation we've seen in the last few years. They were the first to identify issues in the learning, teaching, and assessing space with language, of course, given LLMs are all about language. They also were the first to report on the AI interference in the current curriculum and what opportunities existed to leverage AI. Communities of practice like this one, thank you, EdTech-SIG played a huge role in allowing our individuals to attend, compare notes, learn from each other, bring it back to the organization, and continue that momentum for innovation. I did say to you there was a lot of joyful experimentation at the start. I think at this point in time, there is a reasonable amount of questioning and self-reflection on joyful experimentation versus mindless experimentation. Is there bigger, better, more sophisticated that we can do? There is definitely consideration more broadly for the student experience and what else we should be thinking about when creating tools. So on that note, I want to start doing something else now with you. I want to go back to one of those stories from cybernetics. This is a story about a mechanical horse that was invented by an American inventor in 1867, very typical of that age where they tried to replicate biology and the systems in biology into machines or automata. They were slightly obsessed with it. And William Farr Goodwin was one of those inventors. So this mechanical horse was quite curious because it operated on a set of pulleys, levers, and belts, I think. This is an image from the patent. And what it did was it replicated the movements of a horse through this artificial machine horse that they built. There was a couple of things. It certainly was interesting because the larger the models got, the heads could be moved with a set of pulleys and levers. The legs, the limbs could move to replicate that walking motion of horses. However, it couldn't be used to replace a horse. So for example, it couldn't be used for farming. It didn't replace the draft horses that were used for farming. The amount of energy and power you expended as a human or as a machine to fuel this horse and crank it up, monitor it, wasn't worth the effort, wasn't worth the time you spent on it or the reward you got from the invention. So please look this up. And I think I just want to go back to something I said about why cybernetics is so fascinating. There is a very interesting aspect of cybernetics where it looks at communication and feedback loops, which means it looks at a biological organism where the different parts of the organism talk to each other and in that ecosystem communicate and have a dialogue with each other. When you replicate that function within a machine or a synthetic organism, how do you replicate those dialogues again, or those feedback loops and communication? And then if you view the organization as an organism, how are these feedback loops and communication channels replicated? Now, there's a couple of things I think we want to look at this horse and the lessons we learned from it. Do we, when we throw innovations, bots, and tools at our students, want them to remain novelties, or do we want them to be practical, applicable, useful tools in the classroom? Now, this story or this concept or this piece was introduced to me by Dr. Fiona Stanley when I met her earlier this year, and it immediately caught my attention. Because what it reminded me was some of the first principles that we use in our English language classrooms, actually any classroom. Innovation or tools for the sake of the tool itself is secondary to the why and the purpose it will serve. I do think when I talk about joyful experimentation and mindless experimentation, there are some questions that I think we're responsible, we should take responsibility for by asking ourselves, how does this improve the teaching experience or make it more impactful? How does this enable better learning for our students? Can you actually verify that learning is happening by the use of this tool, or is it a problem looking for a tool or a tool looking for a problem? Are you sacrificing user experience for the tool and the use of it itself? So for example, if you spend the entire lesson trying to set up this activity and giving instructions on how to use it, is that actually the best use of our time? I think the other things that are emerging that we really need to pay attention to in our classrooms is ensuring transparency with AI use. So for example, if you are creating an innovation or a bot or a tool that helps you with assessment, marking, and feedback, have the students been informed about this? Do you have consent that their work can be marked by an AI assessor rather than a human assessor? The last piece, which is super important, is the students' privacy, their data security, and other ethical considerations. As organizations and providers, we enter into contracts with our students. And I think the transparency piece and our responsibility of duty of care and responsibility to protect their data still sits with all of us, including our teachers in our classroom. So I think as a consequence of this type of reflection that is happening at the college now, we will start introducing a few self-assessment pauses in the process to balance that joyful innovation that we still want to continue and not restrict, but to also make it more intentional and purposeful before it goes into a classroom, if that makes sense. Yeah. Now, look, I'm conscious that I'm speaking a lot and there is a lot of big ideas to cover in a small presentation. So please feel free to put your thoughts and comments and questions as well in the Q&A as we go, and we'll come to them in a minute. So what's next? I think when I talk about what's next, I want to talk about that anticipating the future piece. I've touched on a couple of things, but we're now looking not at the lessons learned so far, but using the lessons learned so far to project into the future and see what data and what information already exists that we can anticipate for the future. So a couple of months ago in March, I came across this essay in the New Yorker. It's called Your AI Lover Will Change You. Fascinating. It is a very long, reflective essay. And basically the premise of the essay is it's talking about the proliferation of comfort bots that offer company advice, comfort, physical support to humans? What are those benefits? What are those promises? And if in fact, here and now, are those promises on their way to being realized? It poses a central question for us. This is the question: if AI meets our companionship, emotional or physical needs, does that make us less lonely, more cooperative, less violent, happier, more intelligent? So in posing this question, Lania does a couple of things. And what I've done for you is today pulled out a couple of parts of this essay that particularly stayed with me. So I might just show you that. So this is the first one I want to focus on. Around the turn of the century, it was routinely claimed that social media would make people less lonely, more connected, more cooperative. That was the point, the stated problem to be solved. But at present, it is widely accepted that social media has resulted in an epidemic of loneliness, especially among young people. Okay. This was another bit that stayed with me. Often someone of stature and influence in the AI world will ask, how can we apply our AIs, the ones that people fall in love with, to make those people more cooperative, less violent, happier? How can we give them a sense of meaning? And what Lania says here is the notion of human improvement, and this particular notion of human improvement rubs him the wrong way. One reason it feels creepy, the black box nature of the way we're creating AI. And another is the assumption that pain is probably bad. So I just want to stop there and think about this a little bit with you. Pain is bad. Acquired experiences, particularly that are harsh, can be circumvented. And you can attain this, you can get to this place of knowledge, experience, enjoyment without having done the hard yards, basically. Knowledge does not need to be effortful, for example. It can be acquired effortlessly, is the assumption here that he's struggling with. Yeah. This last one, I think, goes to the crux of it. This is in context of AI sex bots in particular, or AI comfort tools. Think of the many historical instances of artificially easy companionship for powerful men, all the geisha and courtesans. Did those societies become more humane or more resilient? If so, I cannot find the evidence. So obviously this article, I've read and reread it a couple of times, and it's left quite an impression on me, really, because it immediately fired my brain to think of a couple of things. Just from these little passages and sentences that I've shared with you, I hope you also are starting to feel a little bit of that feeling that I first felt when I read this of, I can only describe it as a slight hint of terror and an enormous amount of respect for the challenges that lie ahead of us. That's the way I can summarize it for us. I think maybe what this then left me with, the loneliness epidemic, the pace at which it's evolving, left me with one central question, which I do want to share with you now for your input. Given the speed at which AI is evolving, what questions about the future of teaching and learning in ELT keep you up at night? I'll give you a second to think about this, and please feel free to put your responses in the Q&A section, and we'll come back to them. I can't actually see the question, Sophie. I can't actually see the responses, I think.
Do you have your chat open, Aparna?
I do.
Yep. There's a few responses that have gone in there. Maybe you just need to change your chat to everyone.
Oh, okay. So I think I can see them now.
Yeah.
Will teachers become redundant? Humans become obsolete? I hope you can read. I hope you can read others' questions as well.
Yes, they can. Yeah.
Yeah. Robot teachers, job security, the quality of information students are getting, and AI slop. Students bypassing and always staying a step ahead of us. The one about the cognition, Rusleen, will AI reduce cognition of students and make us less clever? Yep. Cheating accessibility, will they lose all ability to think critically? Okay. Keep those comments coming, because I want us to use this as a launch pad to start anticipating the future. And by this, I mean, we are so good just looking at the chat, already identifying some of the potential issues that will present in future. But I think maybe as educators and English educators, we actually have been equipped with some first principles that are almost hardwired for us in ELT that I keep returning to answer some of these questions, particularly on how do we pivot? How does education or English teaching in particular need to pivot to address some of these conversations and issues? I'm just going to share a couple of things with you. And if you have solutions to some of these things that you've been thinking about, again, please feel free to share them in the chat as you've been doing. I feel the first thing, and we all know this, education here on and always has had to prioritize connection. The fact that learning is inherently social and interaction shapes how we think and behave, and how we're inducted into a community or a discourse community, we understand its rules. That is what happens when you interact with each other. And of course, isolation weakens that link. It weakens that social engagement. The thing we also know is teachers who are worried about their jobs being insecure or at risk, a teacher that knows how to actively facilitate and become that human in the loop to sift through what AI does and connect the humans in their care are never, ever going to be out of work. I feel you can write that down from me. So I do think there are these opportunities, but the better we get at sensing and anticipating the future, we can stay one step ahead of our challenges as educators and the things we're already starting to see in the classroom. There was one last story. If I have a minute, I'll just tell you very quickly. That article about your AI lover, there was a fantastic little piece there about Leonard Cohen, the musician, who apparently went to a monastery for a period of time. And if you know his music, not surprising at all. Something he pointed out after his experience was how the monks at the monastery never got a single second to themselves. And that was very intentional. What he says was like pebbles in a bag or in a little bag, the jostling, the rubbing against each other is what polished us, what made us smooth, and what really we benefited from. And I think that goes to the heart of this interaction. And while loneliness is the enemy, it's not AI, it's not the technology, it's what we do with it. So I might just stop there because I think I'm at time now. I'll stop sharing my screen and come back to the group to see if we have a couple of minutes for questions.
We can take a question or two. So if you do have any questions for Aparna, please pop them into the chat now.
I think I've stunned you all with some of these thoughts, but there's a lot to think about. What I was going to say was also, sorry, I had my QR code there. If you wanted to get in touch with me, there are many ways to find me, of course. You can connect on LinkedIn, and we can continue these conversations online as well. So Sophie, if there are no more questions.
There is
I'd
one
like to
question,
say-
Aparna.
there is?
I
Yes.
think it relates to what you were saying about students' privacy. And the question is, how do you gain consent from students?
That's a really, really good question. I think there are several circles of responsibility. It is not all on the educator themselves. I might just flip that question a little bit and think about maybe 3 things you need to be conscious about when you're taking an app into the classroom. Please try and look at what the privacy agreement or some of the rules that you have to agree to are before you launch it on a student. It's less impactful if you do it yourself and have that experiment privately before you give it to a classroom full of students. The second thing is, I think after this, if you do sense or if you do find out that there are some concerns, and you can do this by running some of these privacy agreements through technology themselves to see what are the main risks. You have to get your IT teams involved to ask them to vet some of these tools that you would like to experiment with. The second thing I was going to say was, you're clearly identifying a need to which you think a tool can respond or provide a solution to. Why not run that in a think tank or a group in the staff room to assess if there is a better solution, if there already is a solution, or if this is an area that needs work? So I'll just leave you with those 2 points, because we're about to launch a similar process with us and our teachers again to insert a pause and a reflective point before you introduce a new tool in the classroom.
Yeah, I think it raises a really great point, Aparna, that the idea of students' privacy needs to be a discussion that's happening in all staff rooms at the moment, and at an organizational level as well. And yeah, I think what you were saying about that creative experimentation phase, there are a lot of people going into classrooms very excited about certain apps, and we do need to consider the privacy aspect as well.
Yeah.
I think that that's it for questions. So I'd just like to say a huge thanks, Aparna. You can read the comments later, but there are a lot of positive comments about your presentation. Thank you for giving us that really fantastic meta kind of overview of AI use, specifically in English language teaching in Australia. I think it was really valuable for us to see it from your perspective, where you're looking at a more overview perspective. And thank you for providing us with those really fun provocations. We've all got a lot to think about, which definitely can be seen by everybody's comments in the chat. We'll take note of all those comments and hopefully come back to some of them in our AI community of practice discussions next year. So thank you once again, Aparna.
Thank you so much. And to everybody here, thank you for having me. And every tool or invention that you create, may it amplify you as an educator and reward your students. So thanks so much.
Thank you. I'm going to hand back to Christy now, who will introduce our next speaker. Thanks, Christy.
Thank you, Sophie.